The Grettir saga, or the Grettir saga, is a 14th century Icelandic heroic epic which follows the titular Grettir as he goes about his many adventures. For this project, however, only chapters 32 through 34 really feature a ghost of Christmas. This ghost being Glam, a shepherd who dies on Christmas and then is raised as a ghost or a thrall to terrorize the countryside. This ghost has the ability to speak and is finally killed by Grettir, cutting his head off. Again, we have a Christmas beheading, much like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. This ghost, however, cannot reattach his head like the Green Knight. These Icelandic stories of undead at Christmas time are often speculated to be parodies of Christ, the parody being that the Christian god Jesus is essentially an undead or a zombie, and this would be pagan Icelandic Vikings making fun of that or lampooning that idea. In this case of the Grettir saga, however, there are multiple episodes around Christmas or Yuletide, but only Glam's episode includes a ghost specifically at Christmas. This is chapter 35 of the Grettir saga, The Fight with Glam's Ghost. So Glam has already been turned into a ghost, and Grettir has been called to take care of the problem. Grettir rode to Thor's Hallstad, where he was welcomed by the Bondi. He asked Grettir whether he was bound, and Grettir said he wished to spend the night there, if the Bondi permitted. Thorhall said he would indeed be thankful for him to stay there. Few, he said, thank it again to stay here for any time. You must have heard tell of the trouble that is here, and I do not want you to be inconvenienced on my account. Even if you escape unhurt yourself, I know for certain you will lose your horse, for no one can keep this beast in safety who comes here. Grettir said there were plenty more horses to be had if anything happened to this one. Thorhall was delighted at Grettir's wishing to remain, and received him with both hands. Grettir's horse was placed securely under lock and key, and they both went to bed. The night passed without Glam showing himself. Your being here has already done some good, said Thorhall. Glam has always been in the habit of riding on the roof or breaking open doors every night, as you can see from the marks. Then, Grettir said, either he will not keep quiet much longer, or he will remain so more than one night. I will stay another night and see what happens. Then they went to Grettir's horse and found it had not been touched. The Bondi thought that all pointed to the same thing. Grettir stayed a second night, and again the thrall did not appear. The Bondi became hopeful and went to see the horse. There he found the stable broken open, the horse dragged outside, and every bone in his body was broken. Thorhall told Grettir what had occurred and advised him to look to himself, for he was a dead man if he waited for Glam. Grettir answered, I must not have less for my horse than the sight of the thrall. The Bondi said there was no pleasure to be had from seeing him. He is not like any man. I count every hour again you are here. The day passed, and when the hour came for going to bed, Grettir said he would not take off his clothes, and lay down on a seat opposite Thorkell's sleeping apartment. He had a shaggy cloak covering him, and on one end of it fastened under his feet, the other drawn over his head so he could see through the neck hole. He set his feet against a strong bench, which was in front of him. The framework of the outer door had been all broken away, and some bits of wood had been rigged up roughly in its place. The partition which had once divided the hall from the entrance passage was all broken, both above the crossbeam and below, and all the bedding had been upset. The place looked rather desolate. There was a light burning in the hall by night. When about the third part of the night had passed, Grettir heard a loud noise. Something was going up on the building, riding above the hall and kicking with its heels until the timbers cracked again. This went on for some time, and then it came down towards the door. The door opened, and Grettir saw the thrall, stretching in an enormously big and ugly head. Glam moved slowly in, and on passing the door stood upright, reaching to the roof. He turned to the hall, resting his arms on the crossbeam, and peering along the hall. The Bondi uttered no sound, having heard quite enough of what had gone on outside. Grettir lay quite still and did not move. Glam saw a heap of something in the seat, came farther into the hall, and seized the cloak tightly with his hand. Grettir pressed his foot against the plank, and the cloak held firm. Glam tugged it again, still more violently, but it did not give way. A third time to be pulled, this time with both hands, and with such force that he pulled Grettir up out of the seat, and between them the cloak was torn in two. Glam looked at the bit which he held in his hand, and wondered much who could pull like that against him. Suddenly Grettir sprang under his arms, seized him round the waist, and squeezed his back with all his might, intending in that way to bring him down, but the thrall wrenched his arms, till he staggered from the violence. Then Grettir fell back to another bench. The benches flew about, and everything was shattered around them. Glam wanted to get out, but Grettir tried to prevent him by stemming his foot against anything that he could find. Nevertheless, Glam succeeded in getting him outside the hall. Then a terrific struggle began, the thrall trying to drag him out of the house, and Grettir saw that however hard he was to deal with in the house, he would be worse outside. So he strove with all his might to keep him from getting out. Then Glam made a desperate effort and gripped Grettir towards him, forcing him to the porch. Grettir saw he could no longer put up a resistance, and with a sudden movement he dashed into the thrall's arms and set both his feet against a stone which was fastened in the ground at the door. For that, Glam was not prepared. Since he had been tugging to drag Grettir towards him, he reeled backwards and tumbled hindmost out the door, tearing away the lintel with his shoulder and shattering the roof, the rafters and the frozen thatch. Head over heels he fell out the house, and Grettir fell on top of him. The moon was shining very brightly outside, with light clouds passing over it and hiding it now and again. At the moment when Glam fell, the moon shone forth, and Glam turned his eyes up toward it. Grettir himself had related that the sight was the only one which ever made him feel tremble. With that fatigue and all else that he had endured, he saw the horrible rolling of Glam's eyes. His heart sank so utterly that he had not strength to draw his sword, but lay there, well nigh betwixt life and death. Glam possessed more malignant power than most fiends, for he now spoke in this wise: "You have expended much energy, Grettir, in your search for me, nor is that to be wondered at, if you should have little joy thereof. And now I tell you, you shall possess only half the strength and firmness of heart that were decreed to you, if you had not striven with me. The might which was yours till now I am not able to take away, but it is in my power to ordain that never shall you grow stronger than you are now. Nevertheless, your might is sufficient, as many shall find to their cost. Hitherto you have earned fame through your deeds, but henceforth there shall fall upon you exile and battle. Your deeds shall turn to evil, and your guardian spirit shall forsake you. You will be outlawed, and your lot shall be to dwell ever alone. And in this I lay upon you, at these eyes of mine shall be ever before your vision. You will find it hard to live alone, and at last it shall drag you to death." When the thrall had spoken, the faintness which had come over Grettir left him. He drew his sword, cut off Glam's head, and laid it between his thighs. Then the Bondi came out, having put on his clothes while Glam was speaking, but he did not venture to come near till he was dead. Thorol praised God and thanked Grettir warmly for having laid this unclean spirit. Then they set to work and burned Glam to cold cinders, bound the ashes in a skin, and buried them in a place far away from the haunts of man or beast. Then they went home, the day having been nearly broken. Grettir was very stiff and lay down to rest. Thorol sent for some men from the next farms and let them know how things had fared. They all realized the importance of Grettir's deed when they heard it. All agreed that in the whole countryside, for strength and courage and enterprise, there was not the equal of Grettir, the son of Asmund.